Welcome back to History with Liam, where a real historian guides you through parts of history you may have not heard about before. Today we're exploring the history of the Papacy, one of the longest lasting and most well-known elements of Catholicism. Few institutions in history have endured for so long, influenced so much, or been as controversial as the Papacy. The Bishop of Rome has been called the Vicar of Christ, the servant of the servants of God, the successor of St. Peter, and at times, the master of kings and emperors. For nearly 2,000 years, the Papacy has stood at the centre of Christianity, shaping theology, politics, culture, and even global history. But how did this unique office begin? How did it evolve? And why has it managed to survive through persecutions, schisms, reforms, and revolutions? Today we're going to trace the story of the Papacy, from its roots in the early church, through the medieval struggles with emperors, the crises of the Renaissance and Reformation, and into the modern age, where popes continue to wield spiritual authority in a changing world. The story begins with St. Peter. In Christian tradition, Peter the Apostle was given a special role by Jesus himself. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says to him, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." Early Christians interpreted this as granting Peter a unique authority. And when Peter eventually travelled to Rome and, according to tradition, was martyred there under Emperor Nero, the Roman Church gained a special prestige. But it's important to remember that in these first centuries, there was no centralised papacy in the way we think of today. The early church was decentralised, with bishops in many major cities: Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, and later Constantinople, holding authority in their different regions. The Bishop of Rome was respected as the heir of St. Peter, but he did not yet exercise universal control. Still, Rome had advantages. It was the capital of the empire, the largest Christian community, and the place where both Peter and Paul were believed to have died. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Roman bishops were already issuing decisions and letters that carried great weight. When disputes arose, churches across the Mediterranean sometimes turned to Rome for guidance. Persecution was also constant. Roman emperors periodically cracked down on Christians, and several early popes were martyred. Yet persecution paradoxically strengthened their reputation. The Bishop of Rome was a leader willing to suffer and die for the faith. This situation changed, however, in the early 4th century. In 313, Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, legalising Christianity. Suddenly, the once persecuted faith was thrust into the halls of power. As a result, Rome's bishops began to wield new influence. They participated in church councils, like the Council of Nicaea in 325, which defined orthodoxy against heresy. Gradually, they asserted more clearly that they held a unique authority inherited from Peter. One pope, Leo the Great, in the mid-5th century, famously wrote that Peter spoke through the Bishop of Rome. By this time, the papacy was developing an identity. The Pope was not only the bishop of the local church in Rome, but also a symbol of unity for all Christians. When Rome was sacked by barbarian invaders in 410 and again in 455, the Pope often acted as a mediator and protector, stepping into roles that emperors could no longer fully carry out. Pope Gregory the Great, ruling at the end of the 6th century, embodied this new papal role. He organised charitable relief, sent missionaries to convert the Anglo-Saxons, and reformed church administration. Gregory's papacy marked a turning point. The Pope was now a pastor to the wider world, not just Rome. As the Roman Empire crumbled in the West, the papacy began to fill the vacuum. With emperors far away in Constantinople, the Pope became the most visible authority in Italy. But the relationship with Eastern Roman or Byzantine emperors was complicated. Popes sometimes clashed with emperors over theology, especially during controversies about the nature of Christ and the use of icons. Eventually, these tensions contributed to the growing estrangement between the churches of East and West. Meanwhile, in the West, the papacy forged a new alliance with the Franks. In the year 800, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans, creating what became known as the Holy Roman Empire. This act symbolised papal authority over secular rulers. The Pope could crown, and in theory depose, his emperors. The early medieval period also saw the beginnings of papal territorial power. Through donations and land grants, the Pope came to control central Italy, forming the Papal States. This made the Pope both a spiritual leader and a temporal ruler, a dual role that would shape papal history for centuries. By the 11th century, the papacy was ready to assert itself more boldly. The so-called Gregorian Reform, named after Pope Gregory VII, aimed to free the Church from secular interference. The biggest issue was lay investiture, or kings appointing bishops. Gregory declared that only the Pope could appoint or depose bishops, and even that the Pope had the right to depose emperors. In the centuries that followed, the medieval papacy reached its height of influence. Popes launched crusades, asserted supreme authority over the Church, and built magnificent churches like St. Peter's Basilica. The papal court in Rome became a centre of law, diplomacy, and culture. Pope Innocent III in the early 13th century epitomised this era. He claimed authority over kings, intervened in politics across Europe, and convened the Fourth Lateran Council, which defined core Christian doctrine. The papacy was not just a religious office, it became the arbiter of Christendom. But power also bred conflict. In the 14th century, the papacy faced one of its gravest crises. Under pressure from the French monarchy, the popes moved to Avignon in southern France, where they lived for almost 70 years. Critics called this the Babylonian captivity of the papacy, accusing the popes of corruption and subservience to France. When the papacy eventually returned to Rome, things only got worse. Rival popes were elected, one in Rome and another in Avignon. For decades, Europe was divided, each kingdom supporting one claimant or the other. This period, known as the Great Schism, badly damaged the papacy's credibility. Councils tried to resolve the conflict, eventually restoring unity in 1417, but the prestige of the papacy never fully recovered. The Renaissance brought a new era for the papacy. Popes became great patrons of art and architecture, commissioning works by artists like Michelangelo and Raphael. Rome was transformed into a cultural capital. But the Renaissance papacy was also notorious for corruption. Families like the Borgias and the Medici used the papacy for wealth and power. Some popes fathered children, led armies into battle, and lived more like princes than pastors. This extravagance helped set the stage for the Protestant Reformation. When Pope Leo X authorised the sale of indulgences to fund St. Peter's Basilica, Martin Luther protested, sparking a movement that would fracture Western Christianity. The Protestant Reformation was a massive challenge to the influence of the Pope. Reformers rejected papal authority outright, denouncing the Pope as an obstacle to true Christianity. As a result, huge portions of Europe broke away from Rome. In response, the Catholic Church launched its own Reformation. The Council of Trent, held between 1545 and 1563, reaffirmed papal authority while attempting to reform abuses. New religious orders like the Jesuits and Capuchins defended papal leadership and spread Catholicism around the world. The papacy, weakened in Northern Europe, gained new importance in global missionary work. Many religious orders working in places like Asia and the Americas saw themselves as directly serving the Pope's mission. The papacy was now at the heart of a global Catholicism. The centuries that followed saw the papacy grapple with modernity. In the 17th and 18th centuries, rising nation-states and the Enlightenment challenged papal influence. During the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars, the papacy was stripped of power, and Napoleon even took the Pope prisoner. The 19th century brought even more upheaval. In 1870, the Papal States were absorbed into the new Kingdom of Italy, leaving the Pope without temporal power. Yet that same year, the First Vatican Council declared the doctrine of papal infallibility, teaching that when the Pope speaks ex cathedra, or from the chair, on topics of faith and morals, he is preserved from error. The Pope had lost his lands, but his spiritual authority was clarified and strengthened. In 1929, the Lateran Treaty established Vatican City as an independent state. The Pope was once again a sovereign, though this time of the smallest country in the world. In the 20th century, popes became global moral voices. Pius XII guided the Church through World War II, although his record remains controversial. John XXIII convened the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, opening the Church to dialogue with the modern world. Pope John Paul II, Pope from 1978 to 2005, became one of the most influential figures of the century. A charismatic leader from Poland, he travelled the world, defended human rights, and played a role in the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. His successors, Benedict XVI, Francis, and Leo XIV, have continued to adapt the papacy to new realities, whether through intellectual engagement with secular culture or outspoken advocacy of the poor, migrants, and the environment. So what can we conclude about the history of the papacy? For nearly 2,000 years, the institution has embodied both continuity and change. Continuity because popes have always claimed to be the successors of Peter, entrusted with guiding the universal church. Change because the role of the pope has shifted dramatically, from persecuted martyr to medieval monarch, from Renaissance prince to global pastor. The papacy has survived invasions, schisms, revolutions, and even the loss of its temporal power. Today, in the 21st century, the Pope remains a figure who commands attention on the world stage, representing not just the world's 1.3 billion Catholics, but also a moral voice listened to by many beyond the Church. From its origins with Peter to the current Pope Leo XIV, the papacy remains one of history's most enduring institutions, a reminder of the complex interplay between faith, power, and human history. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a comment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time for more History with Liam.